2023 was a really busy year for the Conservative opposition in Ottawa. During the past year, Canadians became increasingly aware that after 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. But all year long, the NDP and the Bloc continued to prop up this tired Liberal government. In 2023, rents across Canada hit record highs, including here in Calgary, where the cost to rent even a one-bedroom apartment is over $2,000 a month. And a whole generation of young Canadians are giving up on the dream of home ownership due to the high prices and the high cost of down payments and inability to qualify for mortgages. Out of control, wasteful government spending and borrowing is what's driving up inflation to these new highs and driving up interest rates to new highs. High interest rates are leaving millions of Canadian homeowners worried about whether they're going to be able to afford to keep up the payments on the homes that they already own once their mortgages come up for renewal.
But how can a young Canadian save for a down payment when they're paying $2,500 a month for rent? How can they qualify for a mortgage when the payment is $4,000 a month? Now it takes a worker most of their working life just to save enough for the down payment, but then they still wouldn't even qualify for the mortgage. This government's inflationary deficits have triggered an inflation crisis and the highest interest rates in decades.
And in 2023, the government finally admitted that the carbon tax is making it difficult for Canadians to afford things like home heating. That's why they carved out the carbon tax from home heating costs for oil-heated furnaces in Atlantic Canada. But the government then finally admitted that this was all about politics when the Minister for Rural Economic Development told Canadians that Western Canadians cannot have a carbon tax cut out until they elect more Liberal MPs.
Is your government open to, because of the affordability crisis right across this country, looking at other carve-outs for other types of home heating in the future?
That's a discussion that we'll have down the road when we know that this one is working. But I can tell you Atlantic Caucus was vocal with what they've heard from their constituents, and perhaps they need to elect more Liberals on the prairies so that we can have that conversation as well.
We'll continue to demand that the Liberals give tax relief to all Canadians. Just before Christmas, we voted non-confidence 135 separate times for the government's refusal to take the tax off of families who want to heat their homes, First Nations who are suing the government for imposing the carbon tax, and for farmers who just want to produce affordable food for Canadians.
Honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge is rising to request a recorded division.
Well, yes, Canadians have lost confidence in this government, and so have I. So I do call for a recorded division. I'm anxious to see if the NDP will side with Canadians or continue to prop up the government. Here.
Canadians are increasingly aware that after 8 years, decades of ever reducing and declining crime rates have reversed. Crime is now increasing, and it's becoming impossible to ignore the crime, drugs, disorder, and chaos that are creeping into our neighborhoods. Under this government, a small number of chronic, violent, repeat offenders are being given bail automatically, where they continue to reoffend, including some of the most horrific crimes committed in Canada over this past year.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And in his remarks, he left out that under this government over the past 8 years, we have seen the reversal of a decades-long trend of lower rates of crime and lower rates of incarceration, and the emergence of chronic, repeat, violent offenders running amok in Canadian cities and burdening local police, who repeatedly arrest the same people over and over and over and over again.
In 2023, I was on the Defense Committee, and we heard firsthand testimony about the declining operational preparedness of the Canadian Forces. Canada has important historic obligations to its allies and to democratic countries, and our inability to procure even basic material like artillery shells is impairing Canada's ability to be prepared for deployments and also to support our allies.
We have not produced one additional round of ammunition in this country since February of 22. So yes, this is something that greatly concerns me.
So to be clear for the record, the 3,000 per month is the same production as before the beginning of the war in Ukraine?
Yes.
While 2023 was a tough year for many Canadians struggling with the high cost of living and with rising crime in our communities, it's never been better if you are an insider. We've seen in 2023, we found out that the failed $54 million ArriveCan app included an $11 million payment to a two-person company that appears not to have done any actual work. This contract is under investigation by a parliamentary committee, by the Ethics Commissioner, by the Auditor General, and by the RCMP now as well. We also saw in 2023 that the Liberal-appointed directors of a $1 billion green slush fund were voting money to themselves, to their companies that they have an interest in, and then paid themselves salaries from the money that they voted themselves. This is public taxpayer money being given to insiders. Some shamelessly admitted to doing such in a parliamentary committee. And so we have Liberal insiders using a green slush fund for payment to themselves.
Both cases to award the money to the company that you have an interest in. Is that right?
Oui.
The good news is that there's hope. In 2024, my Conservative colleagues and I will continue to hold this government to account, and we're going to keep putting forward common sense ideas to help with Canada's problems. Just like Pierre Poilievre's Building Homes and Not Bureaucracy Act, his private member's bill, which will help address the housing shortage. Every day, we're going to come one day closer to an election where Canadians will have a chance to elect a common sense Conservative government.